Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I feel like we need to start this show once again letting people know about all the exciting stuff that's happening at BuckeyeHuddle.com, all of which only very tangentially involves either one of us. But that's okay. Other people are allowed to be exciting. We can just be the boring, steady sources of, regular podcasts and all that kind of stuff, and let everyone else be the star players. Tony, every George Brett needs a Buddy Biancalana, and Tony, that is how I think of us.
You know what? That's fine. I was thinking you be Buddy Biancalana. I'll be Steve Alboni. I'll hit 192. I am left-handed, at least when I bat, so that fits. Although, technically, I am like George Brett in that I bat left-handed and I field, with the glove on my left hand as well. So, I think really, we shouldn't compare ourselves to any Kansas City Royals ever.
Well, listen, if you're going to be the Steve Balboni of this podcast, I'm going to need you to start working on a mustache pronto. So, great news, viewers. If you listen on the podcast platform of choice, that's great. We really appreciate that. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. But make sure you're also watching on YouTube. And if Tony's not growing a mustache, I want you to shame him in the comments.
No, there would be much more shame if I did. So go ahead. You cannot possibly shame me enough to get me to do that. But thank you all for tuning in. And Tom, we are going to talk about the transfer portal. But first, like you mentioned, some of the exciting news going on at Buckeye Huddle. We went into the transfer portal, brought in Jeremy Birmingham to the Huddle. Well, that's where you can find him now. Birm, of course, known all over the Ohio State verse for covering recruiting in the team and all that. So if you want to find him, you can do so at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And so that was a 5-star transfer, and he's going to be at the top of the depth chart for Buckeye Huddle. And so that got us wondering about the rest of the Ohio State transfers that they brought in. Ohio State has brought in 10 transfers. So we thought, you know what? Let's talk about each one of these guys, where they will be in the depth chart, where they will find themselves in the two deep, Tom, because it wasn't that long ago when Ryan Day would talk about going into the portal. It's like, well, we're going to go in there for starters. We're looking for starting players. And now that's not so much. They'd love them, but with the coming and going of players into the portal, you can't always just go get starters. Sometimes you have to go get the players that are replacing the guys who left. And so let's go through this, and we'll start with maybe an easy one for you, Tom. You can tell me where this guy's going to be playing. Max Klare, tight end from Purdue. I was going to say all Big Ten, but he probably wasn't, because there are 15 other outstanding, first-round tight ends that, Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland and all that. So, no, not a first-team all Big Ten guy, but has that potential. Where do you see him in the Ohio State lineup?
Well, I would, first of all, I feel like he's probably going to play tight end as well at Ohio State, much as he did at Purdue. But in terms of where in the depth chart he is, boy, if he's not number one, that really tells me something remarkable about Will Kazmarek, because it feels the way Keenan Bailey talks about those guys, and the way even Brian Hartline and Ryan Day will talk about Will Kazmarek, they love what Will Kazmarek brings in terms of blocking. And you saw him be an effective receiver as well in some big spots last year. Max Klare, though, it feels like he is the number one with a bullet tight end in terms of just in terms of the receiving piece of the tight end job. But I think Will Kazmarek is kind of 1A to Max Klare's 1. Mm-hmm. And I think you're going to see a decent amount of 12 personnel out of them this year. Ryan Day's talked a bunch in the past about how they view the tight end as being a really important part of the run scheme and in blocking for the running game. And so they love to have tight ends on the field. You can look at Brian Hartline's wide receiver unit and go, well, they should just play those guys all the time. And, absolutely. There's an argument for just you have 5 incredibly talented wide receivers, just go 5 wide on every play, and that would certainly be fun. But they want to have diversity in terms of the run scheme and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes that's going to be 1 tight end. Sometimes that's going to be 2 tight ends. And I think you're going to see plenty of Max Klare. We've talked about, I think we did a show recently about sort of over-under on what his numbers are going to look like. And the over-under numbers were kind of in the 40 receptions, 500 to 600 yards receiving, and like 5 touchdowns. that all feels like a reasonable expectation for him. He's going to go from guy who came in the transfer portal that a lot of Ohio State fans who are, kind of the like tune into the first game and see how the team's going, and they're going to turn on the game and first game and go, who the heck is this? And then by the end of the season, it's going to be like, I can't believe we ever lived without him as a tight end in this offense. He just feels like he's not going to put up Jeremiah Smith numbers, but he might put up Cade Stover numbers or close to it, and that's pretty remarkable.
You said 500 or 600 yards over the course of 16 games. That's only 35 yards a game. So it's like it's not unheard of. But one of the things that I've written about this position is Will Kazmarek is nobody's backup. He is what he does. He is the one, and that's as that blocking tight end in the running game. So I consider them both, Max Klare and Will Kazmarek, to be co-starters basically, because they're going to be out there a bunch together. They're going to be out there in the fourth quarter of close games together. So when we're talking about starters, non-starters, finishers, I think they're both finishers. I would say that for sure. The next guy, maybe another easy answer for you, Tom, because if Ethan Onianwa is not starting, then you're probably talking about Ian Moore at left tackle, I'd guess. And I think those are your top two. But right now, as much as we both like Ian Moore, everything we saw from Ethan Onianwa, once he was here for a week or two, seemed like that left tackle position was his.
Yeah, he's another one that I think you can kind of write in there, and it feels like they think Austin Sierraveld's going to be the starting right tackle. He's certainly going to be starting somewhere on the offensive line. So if Austin Sierraveld's not your starting left tackle, I know they like Ian Moore a lot, but if you don't have to have a second-year guy be your starting left tackle, that's probably a positive thing. And they brought in Ethan Onianwa to start, and he's someone who I think you can look at him and go, yeah, but he played at Rice, so how good is he really? He was projected as potentially like a second-round draft pick if he had turned pro after this year. So he's someone who you could be talking about him getting picked in the same range that Donovan Jackson or Josh Simmons did a year from now. And I would be fairly surprised if Ethan Onianwa was not your starting left tackle, because it feels like they brought him in with the plan of that being his job, and we didn't see anything in the spring that made us kind of go, I don't know if that's going to work. So I think that's going to just be sort of a very natural, easy fit for him to step in and just sort of be a very solid left tackle for Ohio State. And then a year from now, is he a second-round pick? Is he a first-round pick? We'll see. But if that's the kind of questions you're asking about your left tackle, that's a very good sign for your team.
Yeah, dropped 20-some pounds since he arrived at Ohio State, and really has kind of taken ownership of that. And I was really impressed when we got to talk to him. And, of course, this is a Rice kid who could have gone a bunch of places academically. If you can get into Rice, you can get into it just about anywhere. And, he's a guy that has fit in really, really well with the locker room, which is probably something we're going to say about every single one of these guys. I don't remember the last time we were like, this guy is a jerk. Like, he is ruining everything. He is.
We say that about Kevin all the time, but he's not on scholarship.
Leaving his clothes everywhere, leaving his shoes everywhere. Pizza boxes, outrageous, just laying on the floor. We've got bugs now, but he's done a good job of fitting in, and he's going to be your starting left tackle, barring anything unforeseen. Now, Tom, I'm just going through this list. I'm not going by any specific position, so we're going to jump around. Here's one for you. Ty Howard, and I'll say Ty Howard, and some people may forget about Ty Howard, linebacker who came over from Duquesne. He's kind of like a pass rushing nickel linebacker type of thing. That's what he was doing at Duquesne, and he gets here and he's 6 foot 200. So he's really, when we saw him, we didn't see much of him because he wasn't with the threes or anything like that. I view this like he's a walk-on under, at least as far as I know, that you're probably not going to see defensively. We may see him on special teams, but he's got some work to do to be part of this depth chart.
Yeah, and you asked Ryan Day last week about the number of scholarships they had because they're managing to the number of 105, and Ryan Day talked about 90 being sort of the number of scholarships that they have. I would guess he's probably not one of those 90, and he's probably more of a, yeah, like you said, a depth guy, a special teams guy, a scout team guy, and that is, I don't want to undersell this. Those are really, really important pieces of the team. You have a lot of coaches freaking out because they're losing some of those guys. So, I don't want any of this to come across as trying to downplay anything, but he's not someone who you saw in the two deep this spring, and that's totally fine. If he can work himself into a bigger role as the season goes along or as next season goes along, that's great. He's kind of an interesting fit. As you mentioned, he could be like the Tyler Moeller type of guy, maybe, that like the old star position where it's kind of like, it's kind of a nickel, it's kind of a linebacker, it's kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You could find something like that. This is it's a very talented linebacker room. It's a very talented group at nickel right now where you've got Lorenzo Styles, you've got Bryce West, you've got Miles Lockhart. So you've got three guys who have been here a little while, who are probably a little bit bigger and a little bit ahead of where he is right now. But this is someone who is going to be an important role player who could work himself into a bigger role as the season goes along or as next season goes along. But he's not someone I'm looking at right now in terms of Ty Howard and saying this is someone who I'm expecting to be, someone who's getting 20 snaps a game or anything like that.
And I can also hear some people screaming, yes, he is Bo Jackson's brother. So
yes,
there is that. You've got the family connection there as well. Next guy we got to see some of quite a bit in the spring, and that's Logan George, defensive end from Idaho State, who comes to Ohio State from a defense where, like a 3-3 stack, 3-3-5 stack type of defense where he's playing defensive end, but he's immediately just engaging with sometimes centers and guards, tackles and guards. He's rarely doing the one-on-one type of stuff that you'll get to see from a 4-3 alignment or 4-2-5 four-man front where defensive ends just get to deal with the tight end or a tackle. This guy, he would just immediately just slam his face into a double team. And now I remember talking to him in the spring. I'm like, do you feel like you're freer? You've got more freedom? He's like, nah, it is what it is. I'm like, oh, well, have fun, sir. Just good on you. But where do you? Because this is a guy again. They brought him in. They were low on numbers at defensive end. Surprisingly, they've gotten deeper. But he's one of the more productive players. But it's an FCS production.
Right, and he's someone who's certainly in the two deep at defensive end. Ryan Day talked about five guys sort of being ready to be in the mix at defensive end, and Logan George absolutely is one of those guys. What's more interesting to me is one of the areas that we're not talking about. We're not going to be talking about a defensive tackle who they brought in the portal, and that's an area where they were coming into this to the offseason saying, boy, we sure hope we can add a defensive tackle in the portal, and that didn't happen. So then the question is, where does Logan George fit in with helping to mitigate some of those concerns? Because they feel very good about the ones at defensive tackle. The question is more the guys behind them. And if you didn't bring in someone in the portal, and they didn't, and it doesn't sound like there's anyone else who's sort of floating around out there who's going to be a late addition. So now it's okay. It's not quite the severity of Apollo 13, but you're kind of in that Apollo 13 scene where it's like, all right, we have to solve this problem. Here's what we have. We have a sock, we have duct tape, we have, and so now you've got 5 defensive ends you feel pretty good about. You've got 2 defensive tackles you feel pretty good about, and you got a bunch of other defensive tackles who are, they're not nothing. They've got guys who have played snaps, but they're not guys who they necessarily feel are 100% ready to be regular guys. And if the ones go down, no problem, it's next man up. So where does Logan George fit into that? Well, Logan George, as you said, has done some interior pass rushing before and played inside a little bit. So if you see more of that rushman package where they have 3 or 4 defensive ends on the field, maybe you use that a little bit more if you feel like, well, you can get away with him being someone who's kind of going inside or working against interior guys a little more often. that may be something that you see a role for him, but he's certainly someone I'm expecting to see regular rotational minutes. You're going to see Logan George in the first half against Texas. Whatever the score is, he's going to be playing real minutes, real snaps right from the start. And then the question is just how creative do they want to get with him beyond that?
So the defensive ends that have to go inside, those are your CO2 scrubbers, basically what you're saying. That's what we're calling them now.
I haven't seen Apollo 13 in a while, but I think yes. I'm going to say yes.
Yes. Call them scrubs for short, Tom. See how that goes for you.
I will definitely not do that, but thank you for the offer.
Yeah, they're going to have a top 5 there, and it will be interesting to see how that shakes out over the course of the season, because we've seen players fluctuate, like where this guy, this number 2 or this number 1B is getting more snaps than another guy, but by the middle of the season it has flipped. Kind of like with Bennett Christian and Jelani Thurman last year, where Jelani Thurman started out ahead of Bennett Christian, but by the middle of the season Bennett Christian had passed him by. So that's something that these defensive ends are going to be competing against each other and working with each other the entire season to see how they will all shake out. A guy that I can't say I never, but Phillip Daniels, they went into the portal, went to Minnesota for the Minnesota right tackle. He started 4 games as a redshirt freshman last year. And, when they landed him, Ethan Onianwa, some people were like, and maybe, I don't even know that we may have been the same, where like, well, it looks like they've got their 2 starting tackles. But then you kind of watch what he was and what he did there. You're like, well, he's going to have to get better to be a starting tackle this year. And then you watch him in spring, and as you mentioned, Austin Seerveld likely to be the right tackle. If he's not, he's going to be somewhere. And Phillip Daniels, from what we've been told, is probably a year away from being a starter, although that's going to be a tough ask. Maybe a year away from being in the top 5 in terms of, could he start at right tackle next year? Maybe, but that means Austin Seerveld has to move inside or something like that. Can you get into the top 5, then you figure it out. For me, I think he's a year away, but at this point, probably the backup right tackle.
That's where I would have him right now. It feels like with Seerveld being basically written in Sharpie by Ryan Day, they've talked about, he's going to be one of the 5. And it feels very much like that's probably going to be at right tackle. So then if you've got Onianwa at left tackle and you got Seerveld at right tackle, you're out of tackle spots. And Daniels is someone who, when you mentioned earlier that they used to just go into the portal for starters, Daniels was the first name that came to mind, where you bring in someone and you have the luxury of not having to throw someone into the fire. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. And, I would guess that he was presented with, hey, you have the opportunity to compete for the starting job. And Austin Seerveld was someone who last year showed that he can be a starting offensive lineman on a national championship team. So that's a tough thing to beat. That's a tough guy to beat out for the job. And, you got Ian Moore on the other side. So you have tackle depth right now where, is Phillip Daniels, I think the more interesting question with Phillip Daniels is Phillip Daniels offensive tackle 3 right now, or is he offensive tackle 4 behind Ian Moore? If someone goes down with an injury, if you have the situation you had with Josh Simmons last year, who's the next person to go in? Is it Ian Moore? It might be. Or is it Phillip Daniels? Either way, Phillip Daniels has more experience than Ian Moore, but Ian Moore's been in Ohio State longer. So, either way, this is the kind of depth that you need to have in the offensive line room. And, Justin Fry, I think, Ohio State fans had, let's say a mixed relationship with Justin Fry over the years in terms of recruiting and development. But man, you look at the offensive line room that Justin Fry left. Yeah, they just won the national championship, and that's all well and good. But he also left a pretty good offensive line room. They were a couple bodies short, but they have brought in 3 transfer offensive linemen, and we'll get to the third in a little bit. But you bring in one who's going to start, and then you've got probably the other 2 are coming in to be depth and have some development time before they're really needed to be called on. That's really good news if you don't have to just throw guys right in there before they're maybe entirely ready.
Yeah, and while we're on the offensive line, I do want to talk about the other guy, Justin Terry, that they brought in from West Virginia. Redshirt freshman, did not play at all last year for West Virginia. From Ohio, big 6'6", 330-pound kid. Looks like the kind of tackle you'd like, where it's like one of the guys off the bus types. But I don't see, like, this year for him, it's a difficult path to playing time. Let's just say that. Certainly, we just told you who the top 4 tackles were, and we haven't seen Justin Terry at all to know that he's likely a tackle, but could he play guard? Maybe. Just depends on where the need is and where he fits in. But I think this is a year, if they could redshirt Justin Terry, they would, but he's already redshirted. But I don't know that means he's going to play in more than 4 games.
No, this is another one where this is very much they came in with a couple bodies less than they wanted to have. And so now you can bring him in and you can bring him along nice and slowly. We've talked a bunch over the years about offensive linemen and the development path and the path to the field. It is not the same as every other position. Your first year, you basically, outside of really unique players, that first year to me is basically a write-off for most people. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you have your exceptions. You have, Donovan Jackson, for example, was in that Bison package as a true freshman. And you've seen guys in that role over the years. That's not the norm. Generally, it's you spend 1 year just here, eat this peanut butter sandwich, drink this protein shake, go see Coach Mick, and we'll see you tomorrow. And you're going to, guess what? You're going to get to drink more protein shakes and eat more peanut butter sandwiches and keep. Do you like a grilled chicken breast? Oh boy, do I have good news for you about the next 12 months of your life. That's kind of the typical first year for an offensive lineman at Ohio State. And then your second year, you're getting on the field a little bit more, and you're starting to figure out, okay, the playbook and all that kind of stuff. And then your third year is when I sort of really seriously look at you and go, okay, now you're maybe a real legitimate contender to win a starting job. He's in his second year. It's his first year at Ohio State. No background in terms of having actually played at West Virginia. This is very much a welcome to Columbus, we'll see you next year kind of situation for me, where, he may get to play in the second half against Grambling and games like that. And in which case, like, great, you get some film, learn from it, but you're not in a spot where you need anything from him this year. So this can just be very much a development year, and we'll see you next year in spring ball.
It is interesting compared to like a decade ago and beyond, where if you needed an extra offensive lineman or an extra defensive lineman, you'd go to the other side of the ball. Mm-hmm. We've seen Ohio State win a national championship with a former defensive lineman, defensive end Darrell Baldwin as the right tackle, Chase Ferris on the offensive line. We've seen over the years where an offensive lineman would move to the defensive line because they need bodies, and it's like that was kind of the not the end of their career, but it's like, well, it's not going to turn out quite as you hoped. Joel Hale moved back and forth. He was a 2011 signee, but Billy Price came to Ohio State as a defensive tackle, and right away he's like, yeah, this isn't going to work out for me, and he turned out okay at center. But now it's like, you know what? Instead of moving somebody over, let's just go see what's in the portal, and we'll do that, because once you're switching sides of the ball, it's pretty much an admission like, well, okay, we've made a mistake. Now, sometimes you can go grab a guy, and you're like, we don't know what side of the ball you're going to be on. We just know that we'd like you here. But for an offensive or defensive lineman, when you're like, I've got designs on you being an offensive tackle or defensive end, it's like, and it's not working out, that guy just goes into the portal and you replace him with somebody who's actually played the position nowadays. And, but yeah, I'm with you. Like, there's really not a lot of room for playing time for Justin Terry. Plus, he's going to be competing against, Deontay Armstrong, who also redshirt freshman this year, who wants to play tackle, is a tackle, and wants to, get those snaps that everybody else is going to be vying for. The next two guys I want to talk about, Tom, are specialists. Ohio State went to Ball State, or actually, they went to the portal for Jackson Corville. It'd be much more rude if you just show up on Ball State's campus. Like
the old Tim Beckman.
Thank you. Like Tim Beckman, looking there to poach some Nittany Lions back in the day. But Jackson Corville from Ball State has 2 years remaining. And Grant Mills, long snapper from North Carolina, is a redshirt freshman this year. I think under the radar in terms of importance that Grant Mills is, because John Furlman, Ohio State's long snapper for a couple of years now, has been fantastic, and this is his last year. So they lost their future long snapper to the portal, so then they bring in Grant Mills to be that guy, and that fills that void. And then Jackson Corville is interesting to me because he's basically got the same numbers as Jaden Fielding, except he's got a 52-yard game winner against Northern Illinois last year. So he maybe, some might say, has a bigger leg, but also Jaden Fielding was playing hurt quite a bit last year. So I just think this is an interesting set of, it's a nice, interesting competition that Ohio State is going to have here. And it's not unlike things we've seen before, like Ryan Pretorius and Aaron Petrie. And Jaden Fielding was part of a kicking competition as a walk-on that he ended up winning. So he's been through this before. But two interesting and maybe under-the-radar additions for the special teams.
Yeah, these are under the radar right until the moment where the starter gets hurt and everyone says, oh, thank goodness you've got a second person here, because they, as you mentioned, Morrow Evans, who is the other long snapper on the roster, the other kind of scholarship or higher profile long snapper on the roster last year, is gone. He entered the portal. Max Lamonaco, I think, graduated. Colin Johnson entered the portal. Some of the, guys in the portal could potentially come back depending on the number situation. We've talked about that a bunch on other shows. We don't need to go into that detail, but you need a couple guys at each of those spots because it is a specialized position. I've seen people ask, can't you just put a center there? It's basically the same thing. It's like, no, it is very much not the same thing. You have very different requirements for what those positions do. And Ohio State has been very fortunate to have a lot of great long snappers over the years where you just don't notice them. And so to have that continue and potentially now have your long snapper of the future on your roster this year alongside John Furlman is great. And then in terms of the kicking, like the kicking competition, absolutely have your kicking competition this year. Whoever wins it, fantastic. But you have a second scholarship kicker on your roster, which is a big deal because that's something you mentioned last year. Jaden Fielding was kind of banged up. Jaden Fielding kept kicking. They had Austin Snyder, who was a walk-on. He kicked a little bit at times, but it was really, even when Jaden Fielding was banged up, they felt like Jaden Fielding was their best answer. So now you potentially have a second guy who, if your kicker gets hurt, you can put a second guy in there. Because he was not right. He had that one game where he kicked 3 kickoffs out of bounds. I mean, that was, you could read Ryan Day's lips on the sideline. It was just basically like, what the heck is going on? And so if you don't have to put a guy out there when he's not 100%, great. Have another guy who you feel like you can trust in those big moments. But also, again, have a guy who now, Jaden Fielding, this is going to be his last year of eligibility, I'm almost sure. And so then now you potentially have your longer term solution there on the roster as well.
I'm just looking to verify the Jaden Fielding thing. But yeah, I could see both of those guys being utilized in terms of, they both have experience. So why wouldn't you? And I don't know that there's going to be like one that's the long range guy. Like I think Aaron Petrie was, and Ryan Pretorius was just like, I'll do 40 and in. And Aaron Petrie does 45 and beyond, and then the 40 to 45 is a demilitarized zone. I think we'll just go for it every time there. I think that was the rule. C.J. Donaldson, running back from West Virginia, another transfer from West Virginia. Ohio State's building pipelines out of other teams at this point now in the portal. And we saw C.J. Donaldson running with the 1s and 2s all spring long, more so with the 2s. But here's another guy that, like I said earlier, he's going to be playing in the fourth quarter of games. He may not be starting the games. Maybe he will be, but like he's going to be a top 2 running back unless Bo Jackson can get in there. I think that's the consensus, or at least that's my opinion of what the consensus is. But he's a guy that has tons of experience, has done this before, has been fine starting, has been fine coming off the bench. He's contributed 700-yard rusher on average basically all 3 years of his career. Has had 100-yard games, has been reliable, has been relied upon to win games. And with as young a backfield as Ohio State has, he's a really, really good fit in terms of the experience, but also I'm not going to get upset if I'm not carrying the ball. I'm not here just for me. I'm here to win. And so I think he's a good addition. And for me, he was in the top 2 all spring long. He's going to be there this season unless, like I said, Bo Jackson just completely flies by him, which is going to be a tough ask. But I'm also not going to put something like that past Bo Jackson.
No, and I think C.J. Donaldson opens the season as the part of the pair and a spare that you always need at running back. Could Bo Jackson work his way in there and then Donaldson ends up as the spare? Sure, it's possible. It's very hard to evaluate running backs in the spring. Coaches talk about this all the time in camp settings, in spring ball settings. You don't really know what you got until guys are really doing it with, the live fire and, having to break tackles and it's not just thud and all that. So yeah, we'll see where that all sort of shakes out, but he's certainly part of that top 3. And he's, based on what we saw this spring, certainly part of the top 2 coming out of spring. And I think it's, they have so much that they can point to last year in terms of how they split the carries between Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson and the benefit that those guys saw. You have all sorts of testimony from those guys. You also have, hey, look how fresh these guys look. Look at Quinshon Judkins bursting through for a long touchdown or a long run right after halftime in the national championship game. Look at Travion Henderson taking off on a screen against Texas or for a long touchdown against Oregon. Those guys looked a way that you never see running backs look. At that point of the season, and you really have never had a chance to see guys look that way in game 15 and 16 of the season because you guys have never been asked to do that. And if you're a 25 carry a guy, you don't look like that at the end of the season. Ashton Jeanty did not look at the end of the season the way Ashton Jeanty looked at the beginning of the season for Boise State. And that's because he was asked to really carry the mail all the time. Those guys, they just looked different. And so now you have James Peoples was in person to watch it all last year. And James Peoples, I think James Peoples is probably running back 1, but C.J. Donaldson, James, I don't think you're going to have to tell James Peoples, listen, so there were these 2 guys last year. Stay with me. This is going to be a long story. Like, he was there. He saw it. I don't think you're going to have to sell him too hard on and give over some carries in the second quarter of this game in October, and you're going to thank yourself later. This is one of these things where I think there's going to be a really solid role for C.J. Donaldson. You get the sense that James Peoples is going to be running back 1. C.J. Donaldson is probably running back 2 right now. But, in the limited amount that we could see from him, he looked real impressive in the limited glimpses we got in the spring game. He looked good in some of the practices we got to watch. So I think he's going to be a contributor, but he's probably – this is less of a 1-1A situation than it was last year, I would guess, and more of a James Peoples is number 1, but C.J. Donaldson is going to get a bunch of carries as well, and then we'll see what happens with Bo Jackson because I do think he's going to end up with a bigger role as the season moves along.
Yeah, I think C.J. Donaldson may be similar to Mayan Williams, where once Travion Henderson took over, like he was the starter, but Mayan Williams was always, it was no big thing if he was in the game. And it's like, yeah, of course he is. That's Mayan Williams. And I think that's going to be the situation you have with C.J. Donaldson. To go back to Jackson Corville, he still has a red shirt. So as you said, this is Jaden Fielding's last year. So they could actually accomplish 2 things. They could redshirt him and also make him the long field goal kicker because he can play in 4 regular season games. He can play all of the postseason. So he could still very much be a part of this year while redshirting, and then be the guy for 2 years after that, after Jaden Fielding is done this year. So I think that could also be the way they go. And then, Tom, the last guy we're going to talk about, Bo Atkinson, defensive end from North Carolina, again, building a pipeline to another school. As we've talked about him so many times now, but to me, we've already said it, probably him and Kenyatta Jackson starting against Texas. I think we've agreed on that one. But again, part of this five-man rotation, and we'll see how much everybody else gets in there. How much C.J. Hicks can get in there. Is C.J. Hicks the Mitchell Melton? And if so, is he the Mitchell Melton from last year or the Mitchell Melton from 2023 when Melton played far fewer snaps than he did in 2024? And is Bo Atkinson, at the top of the leaderboard in snaps? Is he second? Is he third? But to add a guy like this who had double-digit tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks last year, he is a proven commodity. So they're going to give him as many opportunities to continue to prove himself for the Buckeyes. But also, I don't think that the fall off from 1 to 2 is going to be as great as it was for the past 2-3 years. So that means the twos can play more, and I don't really see necessarily a game where Kenyatta Jackson and Bo Atkinson saying that they're the two, or whoever the two are going to play 62 snaps in a big game, and the backup is going to play 13 or something like that.
No, I don't think so. I think you're going to see, I go back to the 2023 Notre Dame game with the game at Notre Dame, and Ohio State played Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau out every snap at defensive end. You're not going to see that this year, and that's I think a testament to the fact that the depth at the defensive end position is just much better than it was at that point. These, we're talking about some of the guys who are on the team now. Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, those guys are, much more trusted now than they were a couple of years ago. And to bring Bo Atkinson in, boy, that just, it's like bringing in, you add a number 2 starting pitcher to your rotation, and it's like, well, the guy who used to be number 2, now he can be number 3. And now, boy, isn't it a luxury to have a number 2 starter who isn't really, who's now your number 3 guy? It just gives you so much more depth. It just changes what those matchups look like, where you have a guy coming out now, whoever was going to be the number 2 guy, whether it's Logan George or Caden Curry, now that's one of the guys who's coming off the bench. And now that's one of those guys who's fresher in the second half when those offensive linemen are, those big dudes, Tony. Sometimes when it's hot and, 1,000,000 degrees on the field, those big dudes can really feel it. And so they wear down in that second half. And then you've got a higher quality guy coming off the bench than you would have otherwise. And Atkinson, to me, I feel like I look at Kenyatta Jackson, and in my head, he's a proven commodity just because of the situations they put him in. But then you look at his stats, and it's like, well, he doesn't have the stats that match what he has done in my head, basically. Mm-hmm. And that's a function of the fact that he wasn't asked to do that much, and I'm expecting some pretty big things from him this year. But Bo Atkinson, just in terms of on-field production, he's the most proven asset they have in that defensive end room, because Logan George has been productive as well, but he did it at the FCS level. Say what you will about the ACC, North Carolina is certainly a higher level than Idaho State. So, so I look at him as a more proven commodity in certain ways than Logan George. But just the fact that you have, okay, now Atkinson's one of your top 2. Now Logan George is one of your next 2. Boy, that's really, really improving your depth there. And as we said earlier, that opens up some possibilities in terms of how you might sort of shuffle guys and cover for some things in the middle of the defensive line if you're not happy with your depth there.
I'm just looking back at that Notre Dame game, 65 defensive snaps for both of the defensive ends, 56 for Tyleik Williams, and then the next week against Maryland, he played 70.
One fun note on that game was, Notre Dame's defensive ends. I haven't looked at the snap count, but I can tell you both of Notre Dame's defensive ends didn't play all of the snaps. At least one of them missed 2.
At least
Ask
one
me
of
how
them.
I know.
I just, Tyleik Williams is out there tweeting, free 91, and they freed him for 70 snaps in a game. It's like, here you go. Have fun with that.
Too much, less.
Too free. But Caden Curry played 1 snap in that game, and I assume it's a short yardage thing. Kenyatta Jackson did not play in that game. That was the last time he did not play as a Buckeye. So I'm not expecting any DNPs, coach's decision this year for Kenyatta Jackson, and frankly, for a good number of these transfers as well. Of the 10, I'm saying there are going to be 3 guys that start against Texas: Max Klare, Ethan Onianwa, and Bo Atkinson. Are you with me on that?
Yeah, I think so. How does the kicking competition go? That's really the other one that I look at and go, yeah, maybe. But yeah, I'm with you. When you said three, those are the three names that came to mind, and those are the three that I would certainly expect. I don't feel like there's an obvious fourth other than if the kicking competition goes a different way, then sure, you could have something there. But I think, to your point earlier, I think they would love for that to be take a redshirt year and then spend two years as a starting kicker after that.
Although let me look real quickly and see what C.J. Donaldson has done in his past against the Texas Longhorns. And maybe if he has had a good history, I don't know if they played back in 22 or so. 4 carries for 9 yards at Texas. So not the kind of standard that Ohio State is looking for there against the Longhorns. But it wouldn't be shocked if he's there just because he's a senior and it's a big game, but whatever. Everything we saw from James Peoples this spring is that he is the starter. So there you go. Taking a look at the transfers for Ohio State, where they line up and where they fit in the depth chart. We would appreciate you hitting the thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. And of course, subscribe, hit the bell to be notified. We're dropping videos quite a bit right now. Kevin and Mark are on their Southern Swing. And boy, if you are already subscribed to the channel, then you know that they're dinging you constantly with interviews from all of these top prospects from the South. They went out to Virginia, then down to North Carolina. I believe then they're in Virginia for I don't know all of the states. Tom, Virginia, North Carolina, they're heading into Georgia, maybe some South Carolina, stopping there. Then they're going to hit to Florida, and we can't expose it all. But it's a big swing, and they're talking to a bunch of guys and getting a bunch of intel, and you can find that at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tom, anything else before we go?
Nope, that's it. That's Southern Swing. We talked about Berm. Did we talk about Andrew Ellis earlier?
We have not. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Andrew Ellis is joining. I think Monday is his first day officially on the site. Berm kind of got an early start, so he's been very active on our board already and wrote about the commitment of wide receiver Caden Dixon-Wyatt on Sunday. So yes, if you want access, you want to talk to Berm, you want to talk to Andrew Ellis, you want to talk to our whole team of insiders, it is all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. $4.99 for your first month seems like a pretty good deal when you consider all that, and also, as Tony said, lots of weeks of Southern Swing content still to come. Loads of intel, loads of reporting, all very unique and different than anything else, anything that anyone else in the market's doing right now. And that is all at BuckeyeHuddle.com.
Yeah, and we're all there right now talking about the Caden Dixon-Wyatt commitment and what it means for the Buckeyes. So you can find us there. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you all later.